I find cults and the psychology behind them absolutely fascinating. There really is a cult in our neighbourhood. They were told that all families are narcissistic and controlling, and members should cut ties. Lighthouse used members' secrets as weapons. Please be aware that this video does mention briefly sexual assault, so please watch with caution. I've been absolutely hooked on the BBC reporting led by Catrin Nye on the Lighthouse International Group, partly because I find cults and the psychology behind them absolutely fascinating, but also because this cult in particular hits extra hard for me for a few reasons. The main one being that, worryingly, I could actually imagine myself having been attracted to this group, and that's something that I've never thought or said before about any other cult. It also touches on my specialist subject of data, specifically personal data, personal information, and it's geographically very close to home for me too. The BBC has carried out an 18-month investigation into Lighthouse, and I can't do it all justice here, so I'll link to their reporting below. It's very well worth reading, watching, listening to. A bit of background to Lighthouse, according to the members themselves. It was founded by Paul Waugh in 2012. He came from South Africa and was living in England. And it's a life coaching, or it was told as it was a life coaching group for entrepreneurs. Paul Waugh explained that he realised he could keep building his own millions because he claimed he had made his first million between the ages of 14 and 24. Or he could help other entrepreneurs, and that's what he said he chose to do. That's where Lighthouse came from. And this is the part that would have drawn me in. I'm a small business owner, and I'm always looking for ways to improve, to increase my reach and my impact. And this group would have sounded appealing, at least at the start. As the BBC heard from a former member and his girlfriend, Jeff and Dawn, Jeff's involvement started by being mentored by a member, Jay Singh, who'd been in the group for a number of years by then. Jeff had calls with Jay and then with Paul and other members of the group as well, in group calls. And they started off as an hour or so, but over around 6 months, they got longer and longer, taking up more and more of his day, until eventually Jeff was on calls for several hours a day, starting from 5 a.m. I would have been put off straight away at that point. Not a morning person. All of these calls were recorded, and members had to transcribe them as they went, and they had to write in journals, which they had to then share with Lighthouse. And it soon became clear to the loved ones of members that Lighthouse was very much a one-way thing. The members were giving their time and their money, more on that in a moment, to Paul Waugh and Lighthouse, more and more, but they weren't receiving any benefits in return. In fact, it was the opposite. Lighthouse was telling members that they hadn't had a proper upbringing, and they needed to work really hard to take them from their current level 1 up through the levels. So the levels, Paul Waugh had borrowed the idea of the levels from a famous American psychiatrist, M. Scott Peck. And Paul Waugh told Lighthouse members that everyone is in one of 4 levels of spiritual development. Level 1 is apparently a chaotic childlike state, while level 4 is a conscious and present person, free of constraints and fear. You won't be surprised to hear that the only level 4 member was Paul Waugh himself. Everyone else was at level 1 and needed to work their way through. And how did they work their way through? Well, they were told they needed to keep spending their time and their money on Lighthouse membership to work through the levels. And family and friends were an obstacle to moving up through the levels, according to Lighthouse. Jeff and other members report they were told that all families are narcissistic and controlling, and members should cut ties with their families to prevent being held back. In acting as mentors to the members, Lighthouse was privy to the deep personal secrets of many members. But instead of using this trust to actually try and help people, Lighthouse used members' secrets as weapons. One shocking case that the BBC heard about involved a woman called Erin. That's not her real name, it's a name being used to protect her identity, and you'll understand why in a moment. Erin had joined Lighthouse after she got divorced and she was hoping for a fresh start and a new career. The group seemed to offer a good way to invest in herself and to achieve her ambitions. She opened up to her mentor and shared with them that she had been sexually abused when she was around 13 years old by somebody that her family knew. Lighthouse was outraged on her behalf, which may seem understandable and a natural reaction, but Paul Waugh took it further and he told Erin that she should be taking it out on her parents and taking them to court and suing them. Looking back now, Erin has said that she thinks this was just another ploy to make more money available to her, which she would then pass on to Lighthouse in turn. It gets worse, unfortunately. When Erin started to wonder where all the money, and we're talking thousands and thousands of pounds, that she was giving to Lighthouse was actually where it was going, what it was actually paying for, and she started to ask that question, she was labelled as a cynical old witch. And to keep her quiet, Paul Waugh reminded her, threatened her, that Lighthouse had recordings of her disclosures about the sexual abuse she'd suffered as a child. Just knowing that he would even think of using her disclosures as a weapon made Erin ill. She told the BBC, "I started to become increasingly unwell. I'd even physically throw up." Of course, this changed her opinion of Lighthouse, and she did eventually leave the group, despite Paul Waugh's threats. But shockingly, Paul Waugh then made good on his threats. He made and published a video on YouTube where he identified Erin using her real name and talked about the sexual abuse that she'd suffered. He was informed that identifying a victim of a sexual offence without their consent is a criminal offence in itself. So he later edited the video to remove her name, but left the video up. Confidentiality and trust are so important in all relationships, but especially with so-called coaches and mentors. In an unfortunate reference back to this complete lack of respect for confidentiality, Paul Waugh actually had the gall to tell the BBC that he couldn't respond to their allegations because he had evidence, but his evidence was data protected. Just another example of another unscrupulous person misusing the excuse of data protection. Yeah, that's not how it works. You don't get to expose sensitive information about people when you want to use it as a weapon and then claim that you can't defend yourself because your hands are tied by data protection. It's almost as if the evidence that would support your story doesn't even exist. And it's not just data protection that's being misused by Paul Waugh and Lighthouse. They're now hijacking religion to further their aims. So thankfully, the company Lighthouse International Group was wound up by the courts recently, but that doesn't stop Paul Waugh and the other members being able to carry on with the group's activities. So they're now working under the title of Lighthouse Global. They have a new website and a new brand, which is based on Christianity. The new website declares that they share our 18-year journey from personal development into Christ and the persecution we have suffered along the way. And then the final point that really hit home for me with Lighthouse is that it is literally near my home. In the BBC documentary in the podcast, Catrin Nye says they've discovered 7 Lighthouse people, Lighthouse members, living together in a house near Wolverhampton, which is where I live, near where I live. Paul Waugh is living in a luxury 5-bedroom house in the Cotswolds, not with 7 other people there. Cult expert and social psychologist Dr. Alexander Stein told the BBC, quote, "There's such a strong stereotype that the only cults are in California, where people wear long orange robes, but there is a cult in your neighbourhood," end quote. It's shocking but true. There really is a cult in our neighbourhood. So I just wanted to end by highlighting that if you're worried about a friend or loved one, or if you yourself feel that you're caught up in a group with aspects of cultish behaviour, it's never too late to get out. If your friend or family member is in a group that you feel is a cult, the experts advise that you should never criticise the group, as it will just drive the member further away and closer towards the group. Just be there for them. And if you're the one that feels that you're in a group you would like to get out of and feel you can't, do reach out to your friends and family. Just reach out to somebody that's outside of the group. And as Jeff has shown, and other members, ex-members have shown in the BBC reporting, that once you take that first step away from the cult, it does become easier to leave and return to your family and your loved ones and return to your ambitions. If you enjoyed this episode of The Why Files, you might like this video too.